City of Stevens Point Housing Taskforce meeting, recorded June 22, 2022.
On our agenda today, Director Kronowski's already done a roll call on a sheet of paper, and we will continue our discussion on the definition of family relating to the zoning code. We had a pretty robust conversation last month, and so we'll continue it with our recommendations and ideas from last month.
Perfect. Okay, so as the task force may recall, we had a really good conversation last month on defining family within our zoning code. Talked for probably about an hour and a half on it, and really after staff re-listened to the audio again, just try to figure out, okay, what are we trying to achieve out of this? And there were three main items. First and foremost, and probably the biggest change, would be to increase it from no more than 2 unrelated individuals to no more than 3 unrelated individuals within the housekeeping entity, trying to be a little bit more inclusive of the different family situations. So retitling family to household entity, increasing it from 2 unrelated to 3 unrelated, and then having a specific paragraph in there that allows an exemption for caregivers for those disabilities as defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act and Fair Housing Act, that those would not count against the total number of unrelated individuals within the family definition. I will state I received a few emails from concerned citizens about the possible change. Just a reminder for anyone who's listening online or on the city's radio station, 105.9. Just throw it out there if anyone wants to listen to the city's radio station. This is a policy advisory board, that these are not actual changes that would be implemented until after the proper process via public hearing, and of course through the Plan Commission and Common Council process as well. So I guess I'm turning it back over to the committee. Is this what you believe that you're going to see this month? Did city staff knock it out of the park, or did we hit a foul ball? Thoughts, questions, concerns?
So I said this before, right? I think this is better.
Yep.
There's some of the needs for the IDD community it doesn't address. There's situations I know in other cities where caregivers are very expensive. You don't make much money. Could be 4-to-1, 5-to-1. So this is an improvement, but still there's situations that are great in other cities that don't work here. And we're talking about great neighbors, quiet neighbors, stable neighbors, helpful neighbors. They'd be really a joy for anywhere in the community for these situations to exist. And this wouldn't quite make that.
I'm wondering, Director Kronowski, my reading of the live-in language would be that it could be the 4-to-1 or the 1-to-1. Because it wouldn't count against but then if there's 4 unrelated, yeah. Yeah,
so for those of you who are listening online, there was a question on, as it relates to the IDD community, excuse me, in other communities they have like a 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 ratio because live-in caregivers are expensive, and so to help spread that cost to 4 or 5 families is something that was kind of inquired about. Under the proposed household entity definition, you could have, I suppose, up to 3 IDD community members to 1 or 2 caregivers. And you're asking, is there a way to increase that to help account for 4 or 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
can you either go to the podium or go to the table? Thanks.
So then the question is, what would be a suggestion? Would have to be like an IDD caregiver carve out, really.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
That's what I would suggest.
Any other thoughts from the group?
I'm wondering if this particular situation, maybe ones that are similar to that, can't be addressed on a case-by-case basis where exemptions can be made to accommodate the specific needs of someone that might be applying for that based upon the number of people that are needed to provide care, conditions of the house or the neighborhood or the property. And I'm wondering if there needs to be a blanket definition that covers this, or if that can somehow be addressed through some sub protocol.
A conditional use permit or something.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it would seem to me to offer more flexibility, and if it doesn't cause a problem or there are no problems, can be renewed and continued, and people have the flexibility of living throughout the city where it's available and where it works, convenient, transportation.
Sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead if you're responding to that.
Well, I had a quick question for Mark. Was in most of these cases, are these individuals that are living in a residential neighborhood, or are they living in like a CBRF type situation?
Yeah, I'm thinking about a situation I know of in Park River Falls where it works really well, and I don't know the answer to that. I know it's not a CBRF. It's individuals with a caregiver, sort of a group situation, but I don't know. I know it's not a CBRF. I don't know where it would be zoned to.
Okay.
Could you define that acronym for us?
Community-based residential living facility.
Alder Johnson, you want to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, and good discussion on this, because it was one of the things I kind of wondered about, those unique situations. And while they're unique, I feel more comfortable trying to figure out how to codify them rather than, and even within codifying them, I think you can have some flexibility. But I'm pretty sure there's, the community's going to want to know what that looks like in a zoning code. I think it's a good idea, and I'm a bit familiar with the, is it Chippewa Falls or River Falls, whichever it is. But I think there could be instances where you could have, I know I attended a webinar put on by parents of children with adults with intellectual and disabilities. And they were living somewhat communally with a sort of head of household being the caregiver. And so I think this is probably a model we're going to see, and we should, if we're really going to be building a 21st century zoning code, we should probably looking at how we put this into some sort of framework.
Would it be as simple as defining, almost going to a square footage of living space in that event? Having it part of this, or codifying the fact that in a situation of living with caregivers, that it's, you need X number of square feet per individual in a situation like that, just so that way it'll, you don't have a blanket statement, because every house is different, every situation, if they're an apartment or anything is gonna vary, but if you have a certain number of square footage per person, that might be a simple way to define it that would adapt for different situations.
Is that type of living facility regulated by the state?
That is a good question.
Yeah, I mean, the CBRFs, absolutely,
Yeah.
right? The situations I'm thinking, or the one I was thinking about in Park Rivers, I don't think it's regulated by the state. I think it's individuals coming together trying to set up a good long-term situation.
Yeah, I'm almost wondering if it's better to just call out a separate definition for those that this would apply to within the zoning code itself. And essentially, in order to qualify, you'd have to, meet the specifics of that specific definition, as opposed to just including it as part of the household entity definition, having a specific definition that's called, IDD, household entity. Where we might be a little bit more specific.
It's probably a good idea to have that separate.
Tiffany asked, she said she keeps getting kicked off for some reason. is there a reason we went from 3 unrelated as opposed to 4? I think the general consensus that city staff thought or heard from the last meeting was that while there are some folks that would have preferred to have 4, that 3 was a step in the right direction and doing some incremental changes to the zoning code as opposed to a fairly significant one by allowing 4 unrelated as opposed to 3. And if I'm wrong on that, committee, please correct me.
I think that was where that discussion went.
So I can, I'll look at some of the other definitions that are out there, probably come back with something similar. I'll probably call it out as a totally separate definition as opposed to doing a subsection of the household entity that addresses this. And then from there, I'll also remove the live-in caregiver within the household entity definition itself, so.
And one other question quickly. So Ido brought up a pretty good example about limiting the number of people residing in a house to the number of bedrooms. Was that dismissed by this group as being too large of a transition to make?
There was a conversation about square footage as a basis for defining household entity or family, and we really went into that last time and whether or not that makes sense or not. And I don't know. I guess from my perspective, I was uncomfortable with it because it doesn't address some of the city's long-term goals, which was turning over some of the boarding homes as opposed to being like 6 or 7 bedroom homes for like college students, turning some of those over back to either some type of owner occupied or even duplex style development.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
I think it was also trying to get something that wouldn't get a ton of pushback at
Palatable.
first. Yeah,
Right.
something that, this is a big change that's been,
Yeah.
40 years in the making, that trying to get something is a good start.
Yeah. I'm just thinking long term, if we're trying to be cognizant about all groups and being inclusive for multiple situations, at some point that might be a longer term change down the road.
Okay.
That looks good. I appreciate I think changing the household entity term is just also kind of moving in the right direction, and it doesn't stir up all these other concepts that we have of family, so I think that helps people when they're trying to look for something. Really appreciate that. All right, with that, we'll move on to continuing our discussion on goal number 2, which is increasing home ownership opportunities through social equity. And I know Ryan has a presentation put together to help lead the discussion.
Yep, so I did send out as part of the agenda packet the last few PowerPoints just to refresh folks on what we talked about last time. I did put together a separate PowerPoint that really does outline the specifics, but outline what we discussed a little bit last time, but has a few more specific examples of what we could implement or recommend to be implemented as part of this group's policy recommendations. So just a quick recap. At the last meeting, we talked about everyone's, government acronyms, everyone's favorite.
It's a slide of acronyms.
It's just all acronyms. So we discussed various programs that currently exist for LMIs, low and moderate income individuals. And then there's, I'm not even trying to define all these specific acronyms, and the challenges that come along with those, specifically for those who are ALICE or asset limited income constrained families, and who are might be just on the outside of the LMI consideration. We also talked about the need for, especially in this housing market, sizable down payment needs, hitting that 20% or above that. And then, of course, the lack of education marketing for the various programs that either exist or, could exist in the future. So just diving right into it, we did talk about the definition of family continues to be a major player here. If somebody who's a single individual wanted to purchase a home, rent out a room or two to help offset their mortgage payments, that redefining the definition of family or household entity makes that a more of a sustainable option for that individual. But as currently written, the zoning code would only allow them to rent one room out because of the no more than 2 unrelated individuals. Obviously, I think we're moving in the right direction with the recommendation to go up to 3 unrelated individuals. And that, this will help alleviate some of these issues, but also may allow conversion of once single-family owner-occupied homes to non-owner-occupied. What I mean by that is, and after we talked about whether or not we have an overlay zoning district in which the definition of family is maybe more restrictive around UWSP, I actually thought about like what could the land use policy implications be. This is like my 3 a.m. thoughts. And it was like, well, you're just pushing the students out further from the core at that point, right? I mean, they're going to find housing that fits the living needs that they'd like to have. And if it's outside the core where you can't have more than 2 unrelated individuals, like, is that an actual direction that this body would make a policy recommendation towards? And I think overall, like, it might work for Platteville. I don't know if it would work for Stevens Point just because of how compact our campus is around our residential neighborhoods. But, we should be cognizant that although increasing from 2 to 3 unrelated individuals, that may also prevent some of these once single-family owner-occupied homes from converting back to that. Maybe they are currently renter-occupied. It might prevent them from being converted back to single-family. And so I think what I was trying to get at with that last sentence was just look at the holistic picture. There are pros and cons to every policy decision that the city ultimately makes. We talked a little bit about this next one, excuse me, as part of the first goal, but increasing overall housing availability to allow additional home ownership opportunities while protecting the overall financial interests of the homeowner and city. Sprawling suburban development is a financial detriment to any community. If you are a reader of Strong Towns or the 880 Cities movement, you'll recognize that that's a huge push right now, that our communities are not being set up to be financially strong to help offset the infrastructure costs, road, sewer, water, plowing, police, fire protection services, if you have a sprawling community. And so oftentimes by increasing your overall availability via density, different styles of housing, mixed densities, you help address that, the long-term financial needs of the city while also protecting the long-term financial impacts of the property owner. The city will work towards, in most cases, alleviating its own financial needs by doing things by special assessment for sidewalk replacement or curb replacement or utility replacement. And so that actually shifts the burden from the city as a whole to those specific property owners. And so when we talk about density, when we talk about neighborhood design, we have to be cognizant that these neighborhoods need to pay for themselves, and doing a full assessment, a financial assessment over the 100-year period of like a roadway is one way to do that. And we've done that in the past for some of our newer subdivisions where we've looked at density, what it's going to cost to repair that road in 50 years, what it's going to cost to completely replace that road in 100 years, and then the utilities underneath, what that's going to cost. And then we did calculate out, this is kind of an interesting statistic for anyone who's really into municipal government. It was like $6 a lineal foot a year to like plow and maintain and patch in the city. That was from our Public Works Department. I thought that was a really interesting number. So, but looking at ways through thoughtful urban planning to address the financial interests of the homeowner in the city in the future. Any questions, comments, concerns on this? I will send out a map that we had done a few years ago where we look at the tax revenue per acre, and you can see like in our higher density neighborhoods in the core of the city, there's higher tax revenue per acre as opposed to our low density subdivisions. And that's really what, when we talk about future neighborhood planning and thoughtful urban design, that's one of the things that we think about is the financial impacts to the city and to the homeowners in the long term. And then the recommendation was just looking at like Strong Towns, the walk score neighborhood statistics, and form-based zoning is one of Another one was work towards finding creative solutions for different styles of housing, like cooperative housing, community land trust housing, deed restricted housing. Our existing zoning code makes it difficult for any of those aforementioned styles of housing to be implemented within the city. And why is local government standing in the way and being a burden to that via the zoning code? So one of the recommendations would be expansion of the zoning code to allow for different styles of housing and development without having to jump through extensive hoops. Madison just adopted a cooperative housing zoning code. There's housing urban development information on community land trusts and how to implement community land trusts at the local level. And so those are two ideas that came out of, I think, our research and our conversation last time and part of your overall goals individually.
I think this is a really important one because it blends I think, people who are looking to purchase houses today who might not have the financial equity to buy them, that they're able to work together, and the way that younger generations are looking to live and just access housing is really important. And I think this community, I know in talking with our UW extension agents and planning and zoning, is interested in like contributing and to that model of financing and different. And it also just makes sense to blend like what are the different entity types that exist here in Wisconsin, and what can we do so that people, a housing building can also be a business as well as any commercial building. And so if people need it for housing, we should make that opportunity available.
We may want to accompany some lending institutions with this that are open to funding these models.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Hey, this is Melissa. This is a great idea, and I really like what Chris just said too. I think lending institutions have to be a part of this, because if they don't buy into it, well, then it's just not going to work. But I think there could be some hesitation on this, and so as we move forward, it would be something, if these are adopted by council, then I think it would be incumbent upon council members to do listening sessions or informational sessions within their district to help people understand that this can be a real benefit to the community and it shouldn't be a scary thing.
Okay, as it relates to economic development challenges, the need for programs that assist Alice, lower to middle class populations that seek to own housing, and then engaging local companies to assist with workforce development efforts. Economic development, workforce development, housing development, they all play a role in the city's overall resiliency. And so engaging these local companies like those of Century or Delta Dental to buy into a program in which they want their employees to live here and work here for the long haul, as opposed to having a constant turnover. Getting them to buy into a program maybe that's coordinated through the city to work towards down payment assistance programs. So Oshkosh, Live It Up, Wausau are two very good examples of that, and having something similar within the city of Stevens Point, which has a better name, I don't know, than those two, might be something that we'd want to consider as part of it. So the realization is that there are a lot of programs for low, moderate income individuals. I'm sorry, I just jumped in here. But there are no programs designed to help those who are above the maximum income thresholds but still struggling to find or afford their own housing. And then, we could feed some of those programs through tax increment finance, the affordable housing extension. For those who don't recall, at the end of the life of a TIF district, of which the city has, I think, 8 now, you can extend that for 1 additional year. 100% of the net increment can go into affordable housing trust fund, which we already have established through the city's redevelopment authority. But also find out ways to engage some of our local companies to provide some assistance through down payment and things of that nature. I know we talked about these last time, we kind of flew through them last time, so if there's any other questions on these.
It's nice that we do have a blueprint, or not we, because I won't be writing any of these. It's nice that staff has a blueprint to follow on a lot of these. I think as long as there's programs in place that have functioned well already, it's nice to be able to just, carbon copy some of that stuff.
Any other comments, questions, concerns?
Is there anything existing with the university that, because I assume as they try to attract staff and to the university, that those people, new people coming in, often have a hard time finding housing. They're often professors or administrative staff and often have families and things, and I can see in this housing market it'd be very difficult for them to perhaps find a house, and if there's any partnership that way. I'm mid-state too, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know if there's one that exists right now, but it's definitely something that we should have a conversation with our university mid-state partners on. I think the big thing here is that, we have such a workforce crisis right now, and trying to work through that and trying to find creative ways that we can attract and retain employees within the Stevens Point community. We already have a really awesome city that works super well, but what is preventing people from staying here for the long haul? And housing might be one of those problems. There's a need for updated programs to encourage conversion near the core from student rental to owner occupied. And then, of course, establishing redevelopment plans to acquire, raise, and redevelop portions of the core and older neighborhoods that are beyond their useful lives. Said it a number of times, there are homes in the city that are several decades beyond their useful life. And unfortunately, most of them are either being utilized for student housing or for ultra-low income, high-risk housing. And so trying to find ways to put those individuals in higher quality housing, while looking for ways to ensure that our neighborhoods retain their own fabric, and older homes are able to be redeveloped or gutted and renovated as part of that. We talked about this last time, was the cost to acquire and renovate foreigner occupied housing through student rentals is significant. Income-based housing typically sells higher than like owner-occupied based housing. The city's redevelopment authority should play a bigger role, or major role, in identifying those properties for redevelopment and conversion. One of the recommendations would be to engage stakeholders, work towards a redevelopment plan, and implement updated programs. One of those updated programs could be like the rental conversion program within a specific area could go from 30,000 maybe to 40 or 45,000. And then if you're outside of that core, you're at that 30,000 mark as an example. Finding ways for us to make some really strategic investments in some of our most needed neighborhoods.
Does community development, like Public Works, have any scale for like most urgent conversion based on voluntary inspections or inspections that take place where they might be able to, as they're going through, being like, this is a level 5 need for redevelopment or conversion, and be able to help prioritize that? That might be, especially in the core, be able to help. I don't know if they can, and maybe we can work with realtors on that as well in the community of like, this might be much better as a raise rather than, and redevelopment rather than just a transition or conversion.
Yeah, it's almost like a PACER rating.
Yeah, PACER rating.
For housing. No, we don't. Oftentimes, when we're in a situation where we're issuing raise or repair orders, the house is typically beyond its useful life.
Yeah.
And because of the raise or repair order, it has to meet a minimum state threshold. It says it would cost more than 50% of the assessed value of the property to improve or prevent the raising from being legal. Unfortunately, a lot of times those assessed values are really low already. And so, if you've got a good example would be a home that was assessed at, I think it was like $35,000. We issued a raise or repair order on it, and like to replace the roof and the trusses alone was beyond the 35,000. So in those situations, we have the ability, but we try to work with homeowners. That specific example, we did enter into an agreement with that homeowner who agreed to work with the city on alleviating the concerns that we had from the structural integrity of the home. And thankfully, he's been actually keeping pretty well on his agreement with us, so.
I don't know if it would fit in here, but I know I talked last time about some programs for essentially downsizing multifamily. You know, and maintaining that multifamily use, but going, you know, from 4 or 5 individuals to 2 or 3 in a unit, and getting some funds for an owner to be able to purchase a property like that and downsize the multifamily use. I think programs like that might be a good way to target some of those income properties, where it might be too much for a single-family homeowner to bite off and take on conversion from a 3-unit. You know, we were talking about stairways that were probably moved or rearranged at some point. I mean, some of these properties have really been chopped up, and the cost to take that back to a single family is gonna be, you know, insurmountable. But I think the cost to downsize that multifamily use and maintain some nicer units while still acknowledging that we have a town that's majority of rental owners, you know, so you're not losing ground in these neighborhoods, it might be a good way to go.
And it's it's a nice middle ground of maintaining density in the core, that's part of the
Well,
overall
and we kind of
achievement.
benefit too with this, the way the market is rents have been slowly going up for nicer units. I still think across the board rents are probably lower in Stevens Point than they could be, or compared to other neighborhood or towns in the area, or other university towns even. But I do think that you're starting to see a trend where some individuals have no problem. I mean, home ownership costs have gone up so much that if they can find a nice apartment to rent, they have no problem paying $900 to $1,000 a month for a 2-bedroom, which, you know, say you take a big old student rental that's, you know, a 4, and a 3, well, if you can convert that to a 2, and a 1, you actually might be able to generate close to the same amount of rent, so the building value doesn't drop much. But if the city had funds available to remodel those units, I think you'd be able to, I'm just trying to look at practicality, just, you know, on our end, like what it would take for me to actually move forward and purchase one of those properties and rehab it. And something like that, I think would maybe have some feasibility to it. Especially, I think there's a younger group of property owners out there that are coming into rental properties in general, and even some owner occupied stuff. And I think some programs like that may help with some of those buyers.
Would you keep those as non-owner occupied?
Yes.
But downsize, okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to taking like maybe an existing 4-plex and downsizing it to a 3-plex or a duplex.
Yeah, I think maintaining the number of units would be important, more just from a structural standpoint, that it's hard to go into some of those units and start combining units, and, you know, then you're getting into state-approved plans. I mean, it's a much larger expense than just simply going in and being able to update the apartments that are there and say, yep, I'm gonna lose some money, but I've got, you know, you're gonna lose some occupants, but you can generate an increased rent because the property is improved.
Okay. You guys are tame today compared to last month. So a little worried.
It's because you're doing such a great job.
We did talk about this last month as well, but you know, looking at the continued demand for new housing in Stevens Point, that needs to be addressed, and to allow the hermit crabbing effect. You know, we talked about minimal single or 2-family development the last several years. We are seeing a little change in that this year, especially pretty significant 2-family development in the city. I think we're going to add probably 45 more units of, you can't do that 2-family, 46 more units of 2-family in the next year, all rental based, but they are all set up for, you know, there'll be firewall separation. So if you wanted to split them down the road into 2 0-lot lines, you definitely could. And then identifying ways to start filling the remaining gaps in various parts of the community. And the city kind of playing the role of land developer to help coordinate new housing development, identify new properties, I did get a phone call on a few that we'll talk about here, but this is one, Jordan Lane, Weir Boulevard. This is the city's near east side, so this is not across the interstate, but a really good opportunity where you even have some road right-of-way platted for future development. And this could be as simple as making a phone call to the property owners and finding out what their interests are in selling or developing the property. This one is the one I got a phone call on because several of these neighbors know that this is a landing zone for the airport. But even if you did far south side development, living room, or doing some park space here for the airport landing zone, this one's a little bit more challenging because you do have to detangle some of the federalization monies that was utilized to acquire some of this property. But, you know, you've got I-39 here. This is an established neighborhood south of it, again, on the near east side. So the west side of I-39 as opposed to the far east side, which is referred to informally in the city as being on the east side of I-39. And I did throw this one in as well. This is that area west of the convent. You can see we have platted some roadway, Union Street extension. This could be a really prime opportunity for some type of owner-occupied development, whether it be condos, townhomes, things of that nature. And this is something that the city has been pretty actively having conversations with and seeing what the future of this property looks like for development. We do, and sometimes we get this question, is do you have an inventory of all this? State law states that the city has to annually report on vacant property that's available for development. So if you look at the city's housing affordability report that we do submit to Plan Commission, Common Council, I won't get into my true feeling on the housing affordability report. That is something you can look at, and that actually, the one nice thing out of that, it does identify specific parcels that are either undeveloped or underdeveloped, but are available for residential style development. Kind of gets back into another conversation we just had about the importance of not having to extend utilities. In these cases, you would have to extend utilities, but we're not running, a ton of utilities, a mile and a half down the road to service a, 40-unit subdivision. In this case, you have established utilities in Maria Drive. You're doing some utility extensions up in here, but the whole plan would be that if you look at, like, this is an example, could you get X number of, how many units would it take for the city to become even on our initial investment? And then what's the long-term tax revenue from that parcel to make sure that we can cover those costs in the future when we have to chip seal the roads and we have to rip the whole thing out and restart. And that happens typically every 45 to 90 years on the life cycle of a road. Okay, and then finally, the community engagement. We talked about this, and I still think it's a huge issue, but many of the public has little or no idea that these programs exist, or we have not been working well enough with local bankers to let them know that these programs exist, and that they should push clients towards down payment assistance as opposed to making the client, force them into doing like private mortgage insurance as an example. If you can hit that 20% down payment with a $20,000 forgivable loan or grants through the city, we should be really encouraging that because it takes several $100s off of your monthly mortgage payment if you don't have to pay private mortgage insurance. So working with bankers, but also doing a better job of just getting this information out there. And that's something that we've talked about a number of times with the Redevelopment Authority. How do we better market these programs? I will state that it's probably not the best way that we go about it in my department, but if you get a letter from us saying that you have to replace your roof, we also include another flyer on like programs that you can utilize to help offset some of that cost. But I don't know if anyone ever reads past getting a nasty letter from the Community Development Department and like reads the supplemental sheet that we have. So we could do definitely a better job of getting that information out there. one of the things that when we hired Chris as part of our economic development planning team, was this is one of the things within that job description that we're hopeful he can pick up and do a little bit more with the marketing aspect, so.
Yeah, I think financial institutions are equally as effective way to go, because people are also going there for home equity lines of credit if they're trying to fix something, or just looking at their overall financial picture and being like, oh, how am I going to do this? And those programs at their fingertips would be helpful.
That's all I had for goal number 2. We will finalize that and add it to our white paper then.
The only thing, I would go back
sure.
a slide. I didn't want to interrupt and see, but we talked a little bit about having some kind of build-ready designs, you know, and maybe something, you know, like if you have 2 homes that somebody can purchase and, you know, have a couple designs, something that will fit on a standard, you know, I mean, this normal city lot's 0.16 or 1.5, you know, something that'll fit on 1/3 of an acre, or something that'll fit on half, and, you know, have a couple build-ready designs available for builders to try to eliminate some of their costs, and have some stuff that's pre-approved that they know they can look at a site and say, yes, I know for sure the city will let me put in, you know, and then we can, on this city's end, you can kind of say, hey, here's the density we want, you know, you can fit 4 buildings or 6 buildings with a small community area in the middle, you know, something like that. I think having some of those build-ready plans available would be a big attribute as we look at trying to increase density and redevelopment.
Yeah, we can add that under this specific economic development. Yep, okay.
Yeah, along those same lines, having those examples at the ready, have we thought about smaller, like let's say adjacent properties where there is enough land between buildings where if the property owners next to each other were to subdivide their lots, create a new lot and create a new housing opportunity? Is that something that's been considered or talked about?
Yeah, I'll show you a really good example of it in just a second here.
Even with multifamily, I know we own a lot that has 2 duplexes on it that would exceed the square footage minimum, but I could fit 2 more 4 units in the back. You know, I mean, and that's off of Whiting Ave. It's not up, you know, on the north. It's in an area where there's, you know, looking at trying to alter the lot size minimums on some of those might not be a bad idea, or just, and maybe not even permanently altering, but providing an easier process for a variance or whatever we'd need.
Yeah.
Conditional use or whatever would be required for that.
Right. I think we were talking about the accessory dwelling units and accessory commercial units and how there's a large financial hurdle to install those in certain locations. But if we're adding on to existing infrastructure, if we were to create another space for another home, basically, even though it already exists, that's just another way for us to be increasing the density. And if that helps accelerate the process, that sounds great.
This is a really good example of that. So the city acquired 281 Washington Avenue, and there's actually a pretty sizable water main that went right underneath that garage. So it's kind of crazy, so we acquired it. We actually ended up raising the house about 3 years ago, and we've been trying to get this is a out-of-town owner to consider splitting part of this house, this lot, and then splitting part of this lot and creating one additional lot in here for you know, a home, and then keeping a separate parcel for the water main. But we've been unsuccessful. But you know, we have had those types of conversations. You know, where are there more strategic ways that we can increase our density, but you know, within our existing infrastructure, this is one of those more creative ways to do it.
Well, I mean, you could pull up mine as long as you're in there. Pull up 3124 Whiting.
3124 Whiting Ave.
So there's two duplexes there with garages behind them on separate lots, but I mean, the space behind that is a ton of undeveloped room. You know, I think, and I mean, a lot of those properties there have similar attributes, where there's a lot of lots like that, not necessarily in the downtown area, but, in areas where you already have sewer and water and things run in, that, looking at providing some options for like I said, I could fit 2 more duplexes on those lots, or a 4-unit in the back, and I think there's a lot of possibilities there. But again, I wouldn't meet the lot size requirements, so I think, not a major change, but allowing some variances maybe, or again, whatever would be required for some of those lot size minimums for development in certain cases, probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
So I just realized we're not sharing the screen, so my apologies.
Because even on a builder's end, all of a sudden you take the land cost out of that, because I already own those two, so development becomes, not that it's astronomically expensive to build a 4-unit right now, but it does help eliminate some of those costs.
Even there's a couple on 4th Avenue that are, vacant lots that, would be nice to develop. Another area that we've talked about is actually.
Don't touch Mike's Park.
This third. Boy, you are begging for a bruising.
It's fine, he's not here.
It's the 3rd Street extension in this back area. This is 2nd Street, Maria Drive's here, but we've actually platted right away here and here. And then if you look at this townhouse back here, we actually made them do some really nice improvements along the east facing wall, because the long-term plan was to have 3rd Ave extend up into this parcel. So, but yeah, they're kind of scattered throughout, but finding ways that we could, better redevelop even back here. There's some really deep lots that utilized. So,
Yeah.
this is probably my favorite example on 4th Avenue.
Oh, yeah, that
Yeah, just 2 wide open lots. Yeah, it's owned by a local landlord.
a lovely mowed lawn, green space too.
But yeah, I think we can add the build-ready design aspect to it, and then we can also, talk about the downsizing of the multifamily component as well.
And I know that's not preferred. I know that downsizing multifamily isn't getting owner-occupied ownership, but I do, if you look at realistically what will be accomplished, I think you have a much higher likelihood of that, and even that's gonna be a tough sell, I think. But I think you have a better likelihood of that.
So we are, believe it or not, starting to really get near the end of our time together. There's one more goal that we're finalizing that we'll bring back to this committee next month for your review. I'm trying to figure out a way to phrase it. And so we've got that, and then probably by September, this body would have the final white paper document. And your charge from the council was to have something by the end of 2022. So we are ahead of where we thought we would be, which is great. That never happens in government. With that, next meeting is July, I'm trying to take a look, just so everybody's aware. 20th, sound about right? Or do you want to do the 27th?
20th.
Is there a preference?
20th?
20th sounds great.
Okay, all right, we'll make it work.
Yeah, either works.
At 3:15 p.m.
With that, thank you everyone for coming and contributing. And we'll see you in July.
Thank you.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.